it was asked how the different casts look when you cast out, and how the casts that you make are actually very similar to the casts that you'd be making in real life, because Final Fantasy XIV is a video game fishing sim, but it is very much based on a lot of real life fishing things. So, for example, if I'm going to be using a crow fly, flies are typically used for fly fishing. The cast that you make is actually a standard fly rod cast that you would make, where you go above your head, back and forth, and kind of not really whip it, but like throw that fly forward, because the flies are very lightweight. So you usually do a couple of like fake casts and then cast out forward. That's how you do that with fly fishing. If you're doing something like a live bait, you're just going to do a standard cast out, and you're just going to cast out normally. Heavier baits, if you noticed whenever I casted there, you see watch my character's right arm here and right on the bottom of the rod. If you cast out, I grab the bottom. I got the hands wrong, but when you cast out, that's to give you more distance and to give you more leverage when you're throwing, because now puts two hands into the lever that is the simple machine of casting. Um, that is what will happen when you use live bait, because typically that's a little bit more accurate. And when you're using live bait, you want to drop that bait right a into like a pocket of where there's going to be fish. When you're casting out with like spinners or spoons, you're going to be doing a side cast, because you're not going to be casting as accurately, because when you're using spoons or spinners, your goal is to actually cast past where the fish are and then reel them in slowly through where you think the fish are going to be. And that draws their attention. Same thing with jigs, but jigs highlight something completely different, which is the retrieval animation. The retrieval animation for each of these is also similar to what you'd be doing in real life. With a jig, this is called the act of jigging, is you cast out and then you slowly reel in, and as you raise the jig up, you let it sink, and as you do that, you reel in, and then you pull up and you let it sink, and so you create like this up and down action of the bait of the tackle kind of moving up and down through the water column, sometimes like a sick fish, which draws in predators, because predators know when a fish is sick and they will attack. Same thing when you get into spinners. So like if you're using spinner bait or metal spinner, you'll see this where you'll hear that clicking noise. That is the sound of you retrieving that rod, because the spinners, they don't just sit there. You have to reel them back in. And so that is what that is specifically demonstrating, is with baits like spinner bait, metal spinner, and like mithril spoonler, all of those baits are going to be reeled in. And that's what you'd be doing in real life. If I'm using a spoonler, I'm going to be reeling that in a whole lot slower than I would a spinner. And you hear that. That's a slightly slower spin, because the spoons have to be reeled in slower than the spinners, because of the way that the action works in the water to make them look or sound like real life fish. One more comparison here of the spinner bait. See how that, you can hear how that's like faster and higher pitched? That's because you'd spin the spinners much faster. And then with flies like crowfly, you do the fly animation cast again. This one, they have a slow reel in. I think that they do this because with some of these flies, usually you would just let them float, but you would slowly reel them in. But you don't, typically with a fly rod, you wouldn't reel them in. You would actually be pulling on the float line. But because they don't have that animation, I'm assuming that that's why they have the reeling instead, because that would work too. But typically, when I'm out fly fishing, I'm pulling on the float line because I have more control and I can get more animation into the float. So that's how all the casts and retrievals of the Final Fantasy 14 baits all mimic that, like what they do in real life. And I don't think I've even touched on all of them. I think there's a few more, but you kind of get the idea that Final Fantasy 14 fishing is very much drawing on real life fishing.